This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode. In this week's episode, we're doing things a little bit differently. Last year, I was speaking at a conference and the organizers asked me to moderate a panel as well. And so there were some other speakers and guests there, and I think there were maybe like 3 or 4 of them and me. And it was so much fun because we all sat on this couch and I got to ask them whatever questions I wanted. And it just was so fun facilitating a conversation like that. And I kind of felt like Oprah sitting up there. So I thought, why don't we do a round table and just learn from them and let the magic unfold as the conversation unfolds. So I've brought on Leah Weinberg of ColourPop Events. She is a event and wedding planner out in NYC. And Debbie Orwat, who has been a planner. She's owned a space, a venue space, and she's currently operating the online website and great resource for planners called Planners Lounge. We are diving in. I'm talking to them about how they got started, what were some of the obstacles they came across, what were things that they wish they knew when they first started. We are tapping into a wealth of knowledge here. Again, as always, I know sometimes when I do interviews and it's with somebody who is in a very specific niche, if that is not your niche, don't dismiss it, because I think when you look outside of your industry and you see what other people are doing in other industries and you ask yourself, well, how can I apply that into my business, into my industry? I think that gives you a lot of potential for innovation and creative thinking and potentially a competitive advantage. So I'm hoping you guys are open-minded. If you're not in the event or wedding space, have a listen anyway. You just might find a little nugget in there that is worth chewing on. One more thing. We are coming down to the wire for the Legal 360 Live online summit that I'm hosting next month. Make sure to head on over to yourlegalbff.com/live to save your seat and find out all the details. And I hope to see you at Legal 360 Live. Now, let's dive into the episode. Hey ladies, thank you so much for being with me today.
It's a pleasure being here. Thanks for having us.
So we're doing things a little differently here. We're doing a little bit of a round table, so to speak. And so I have with me Leah Weinberg and Debbie Orwat. And so I wanted to have you guys on here to kind of shed some light on event planning and kind of what your experience has been, because I work with a lot of folks in the wedding and events industry, primarily planners, and a lot of them are just starting out. And I thought you guys would have a lot of great insight to share with our listeners. So before we do all of that, why don't we just bring our listeners up to speed? And Leah, why don't you just take the lead and let us know who you are, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Sure. So I am based in New York City. I own ColourPop Events. I'm now in my 5th year of business. Before starting ColourPop, I was an attorney for a pretty long time. So that has given me actually pretty helpful background in terms of being a wedding and event planner. So with ColourPop Events, I focus mostly on weddings, but do some corporate and nonprofit work. And spending just 5 seconds on my website, you'll see that I have a very colorful aesthetic. I feel like that's kind of my defining quality.
Among many others, come on.
Among many others, yes.
And Debbie?
Yeah, so I had a wedding and event planning business in Denver, Colorado, which is where I'm located, for 10 years, Save the Date events. And during that time, I also owned a co-op wedding studio would be the best way to look at it, like shared workspace for wedding professionals called Studio Wed. And I did that for 6 years as well. So just obviously love the wedding industry. And then also for the past 6 years, I have run a website and community for wedding and event planners called Planners Lounge.
Nice.
And that is, Planners Lounge is my main gig these days. About 2.5 years ago, I decided just to focus on that. And I sold my planning business and the studio.
Nice. I like that. I like how there's like an evolution there in terms of all the different ways you can take your experience and find different ways to both turn it into a business, but also to serve others, right? And so I wanted to jump to Leah for a second. So Leah, I know what it's like being an attorney and working in a firm. Hopefully most listeners to the show already know my story. So can you talk about kind of what that transition was like for you? I know a lot of the planners out there are working that like traditional 9-to-5 job where maybe it's not in the events industry and they're really doing this as a side hustle, right? Like they're really passionate about it. They're giving up their weekends, their evenings to make this a reality. Can you talk about what that was like for you? Kind of what was the impetus and how that evolution unfolded?
Yeah, it was definitely a long time coming for me. I probably should not have been a lawyer. I never really enjoyed it, even though I did it for a very long time and was admittedly very good at it. But I kind of always, it quickly became evident to me that I was really meant to own my own business. Any place that I worked, I was always like watching how things were run and kind of always felt that I could do it better. So every time I was kind of switching between law jobs, I was brainstorming ideas for what a business could look like and contemplated a lot of things. I thought about opening a doggy daycare. I thought about going to pastry school to open my own bakery. And event planning was just something that popped up, I think originally around like 2010 for me. And it just kind of stayed in the back of my mind for a little bit. It seemed to me to be a great combination of my type A organizational skills, but also would provide a creative outlet, which I feel like was something I desperately missed when I was an attorney. So I planned my own wedding in 2012. I found it to be a rather enjoyable and honestly easy process, which people think is insane.
Yeah, especially, did you get married in New York?
I got married in Atlanta, so
okay.
It was a little bit more low key than doing it in New York. I was living in New York at the time though, so it was essentially a destination for me, which gave me a lot of perspective on that. Which is a whole other conversation. But so after my wedding, I kind of slowly started taking steps. I was still working full time at that point. Eventually kind of realized that given my full-time schedule and lack of flexibility, like I got really tired of having to make up excuses for having to leave the office to go to meetings and stuff during the day. So I was like, okay, I've got to find something part-time with some more flexibility because otherwise I'm never going to give this a full shot. And so I found ironically, the last place I worked was one of my favorite places to work. So I found a really great firm that was fine with me working part-time. I was really open with them about what I was doing. Their thought was as long as I was getting my work done for them, they didn't really care where I was during the day. So I did that for probably like maybe a year and a half, maybe a little bit longer, and eventually got to the point where I saw how busy my business was with only devoting a portion of my time to it. And I had enough money saved to feel comfortable and was just like, okay, I'm at the point I've got to see what I can do if I can give this 100%.
And thus Color Pop Events became it's your full-time.
And
here we are. Yeah. Debbie, so I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I assume you interact with a lot of kind of newbie planners, people who are interested in getting in the industry, right? Because that's, as Planners Lounge, that's the community, you're cultivating that community of planners, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So as kind of, the leader of these folks in your community, what are some of the common, maybe misconceptions that new planners have about this industry?
Oh, let's see. I think some of the most common misconceptions would be maybe one that it's easy. It sounds so, you watch the Wedding Planner movie, right? And
we all want to be J-Lo.
So fun. Of course we know you're not supposed to steal the groom ever. Bad practice there, but
that's funny.
Yeah, just that, that it's this easy, fun thing, and you get to go to cake tastings and play with pretty linens and flowers. And of course, that is definitely part of what we do. And that is a great part of it, but I think, when you're coming into it thinking it sounds so good, you don't realize like how hard it can be, both physically and mentally. You think about the wedding day, and as the planner, not only are you on your feet physically for 10 to 15 hours or more on the wedding day, you're also mentally, you have to be right on the A game for that long as well, which is completely exhausting. And also things I think just about being a planner in general is you are working a lot of nights and weekends. So I think sometimes maybe going into it, you don't necessarily realize like most of your clients are only going to be able to meet in the evenings or weekends because they work during the day. And then your events are almost always on the weekends if you're doing social events. If you're doing corporate, you likely would have some during the week as well. So I think that those are common misconceptions. And then I think one other thing that I see is, a new planner will maybe start, they'll put up a website that they did and, just put it out there that they're planning weddings and, and they think that that's all that, the clients are just going to start coming in,
Mm-hmm.
And then they maybe give up too soon. But really, I mean, there's so much more that goes into, getting your business going and what's your plan and what's your marketing strategy and how much do you have to invest and, just the whole array of things that are necessary to get a successful business up and running and get clients to it.
Yeah. So what are some things that folks can do? Because that is, I think, a lot of where people are, right? Is like they've done all the things that, like, they've got the website, they've maybe had one or two events under their belt, but they're really struggling to bring in that business in a consistent way, right? And that's, so what are some things, maybe like Leah, you can jump in, feel free at any point, what are some things that have worked for you in terms of building kind of like your clientele? Because I think especially for weddings, what's really interesting is that you work so hard to bring in a customer, but it's not necessarily going to lead to repeat business from that customer, right? Because usually people only get married once or, they plan an event of that scale maybe once or twice in their lifetime. So I think especially wedding planners are in a unique position where they constantly have to be generating these leads to kind of fill their sales pipeline. So what are some suggestions or tips that you guys might have for folks who are struggling in bringing that consistent clientele through the doors?
I would say that in the beginning, there's kind of two things that people can do in order to get that initial business, and that is networking. And then also, this may be controversial, but I did a ton of styled shoots and I still do a ton of styled shoots. And even though those don't, like for styled shoots, it doesn't have a direct return on investment. Like, because I'm a planner, my work is not visual. I don't always do the design for these shoots and stuff. So like people don't look at a photo and say, oh, wow, she did such an amazing job planning it. So I don't necessarily get found from those. But what I do get is an opportunity to work with vendors who maybe I haven't done a wedding with before. So like I did one a year or two ago and reached out to a designer who we're friendly. I absolutely love her work and wanted to have an opportunity to work with her, and we hadn't done a wedding together yet. So I had her work on this, and my goal with that was to really sort of treat her like a client and show her what a wedding day would look like in terms of basically I made it so that all she really had to do was show up on the day of and do her job. I took care of everything else, made it a really smooth and easy experience for her. And she even commented, she's like,
that's awesome.
If this was so amazing, like you just made it so like, you just made what can be a challenging process, like styled shoots are a lot of work. She's like, you made it just very simple for me. So styled shoots and the networking aspect of it, like start telling everybody, what you're doing, that you've started this company, and reach out to people that you want to work with and take them out for coffee and be really genuine in that process.
Yeah. I love that because sometimes we forget like the source of our referrals. We think, oh, the referral is like going to come from the customer, like the person who's paying, but like in this case, like, yeah, vendors, like they all like to work with other people who make their lives easier. And like, if you can tap into that, or if you can tap into like, who is the decision maker here? Who is the person making these suggestions, and build those relationships, you're going to be kind of on their short list of folks that they're going to recommend. Debbie, do you have any ideas or thoughts you wanted to add there?
Yeah, and I love exactly what Leah said. And I would say, those two things as well, the networking and the styled shoots are definitely, absolutely huge for when you're starting out. But also some of the other things too is just getting experience with real events. So sometimes as a planner, when you're first, if you're first starting out and you don't have any experience in the industry, you can throw up a website, online, but if you don't have if there's no portfolio or no references, no testimonials, there's no reviews anywhere online, then that makes it really hard for a potential client to trust that you know what you're doing. So, when you're starting your first wedding, it might be for a family or a friend of a friend, really like anyone that you can find that is willing to let you help them, even if you do it for free the first time or two, or the first couple times to, get your feet wet, figure out what you're doing, get those first couple wedding day timelines, done and under your belt. And then after the event, you have those pictures from the event you can use in your portfolio. Hopefully you did a really good job and the client is willing to give you a great reference or testimonial or online review. And also even the vendors that you worked with on those first few events, they can certainly write a review for you. They can certainly be a reference for you as well. So I think part of the key is getting those first couple weddings or events under your belt, even if you have to do them for free, just so you can get that base of, the reasons that people would trust you.
Yeah.
If they come to your website and see like, okay, you have, great pictures of the style shoots on there that you did. You also have, pictures from a couple weddings you did and clients that can say, hey, she did a good job. We worked with her. She knows what she's doing. That is, to me, that's such a good foundation to get your business going from there.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned doing the first few events for free. And then when it comes to the issue of pricing or, pricing your services, and you don't have to reveal your secret sauce and anything, but I'm always like, sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, like they're basically working for free. Like I know how much effort goes into planning an event. And when I like hear what people are charging, and sometimes I know it depends, like, what location you're in, what market you're in. But sometimes I'm like, oh my God, girl, like, are you even making money doing this? Can you offer any kind of like thoughts or just some tips that just when it comes to pricing? Because I feel like event planners are like severely underpaid. And I think
agree.
also there's this obviously a mental block sometimes, or like a limiting belief that sometimes we have about asking for, what we want and valuing our time and our services. So that's a whole other conversation, but just maybe some guidance that you could offer our listeners about how to approach that.
Yeah, it's definitely something that I think is a huge issue with wedding planners as well. And I think some of it just is, we do this because we love it, right? I mean, you talk to almost any wedding planner that's been in business for more than a few years. I mean, we're doing this because we have this huge passion for it. So I think sometimes that clouds our judgment of how much we should really get paid. It's almost like, gosh, I would almost do this for free. Or planners would say, I would do this for free all the time. It's so fun. But, clearly to keep doing this, you have to make a profit and, you have to eventually turn up some money here.
Yeah.
I think as far as pricing goes, and I literally just published an entire book on this last fall, like 80 pages of
We're going to link that in the show notes.
Methods, everything, because there's so much that goes into it. I think sometimes as, planners, we think about price and we're like, well, I don't know, like you just kind of pull a number out of thin air. Like, well, I don't know, like $1,500 sounds good for the service. Or, I look at what my competition is charging and, around the market, and that sounds good, but really you have to take this overall view of like, okay, how much money do I want to bring in this year? Like what is my overall goal, or what do I need to make this business work? And then once I have that number, okay, if I'm going to add on, my taxes and expenses and get to this, okay, here's the ultimate number. Then from there, we can break that down into, okay, what are we going to charge per event to get to this?
Yeah.
Or how many events do we need to do at a certain amount to get to this? So that way we have this idea, if you're like, okay, I want to bring home $100,000, and I'm going to charge, I don't know, $2,000 an event.
Yeah.
Look at how many events that is. I mean, not only doing that many events is going to be impossible, but even finding that many clients.
Yeah. And you probably talk about this in your book. I think it's also important I think in the beginning, everybody's doing everything themselves, but you also have to factor in like what it would cost to pay somebody to like help you and to do some of these tasks, because eventually if you want to scale, you're going to have to hire people, and you don't want it to cut into your, what you're bringing in as, the owner of the business, or like what you're paying yourself. So almost factoring in, even though you're doing stuff that you could eventually pay somebody else to do, like factor that into your pricing, because eventually you're going to have to hire somebody to do that for you. But Leah, is this something that you've struggled with, or that you've, had to figure out? Yeah.
Yeah, I think the irony of wedding planners and pricing is that the biggest barrier for people to hire us is obviously price and budget. And then at the same time, unless you're a super luxury planner, you're still probably not charging enough, even though clients are balking at your prices. So I think it's really hard. And at the beginning, you definitely do have to take what you can get. I am big on trying to educate young or newish planners in terms of pricing and what they're like advertising as their pricing, because I get it when you're starting out, if you've got to take a wedding for like $500, $1,000, sometimes you got to do that. But like if you're sort of publicly putting out there that you're that cheap in a market like New York City, I think it undervalues wedding planning as a whole. I think it kind of puts you in a position where you're going to have a hard time justifying later on why you're so much more expensive. So, totally fine to do weddings at a lower cost, but making it super public knowledge, I would try to stay away from. But one of the things that I've kind of realized with my business lately after getting certain repeat questions from clients, so like as part of my full planning package, I don't assemble favors. I don't assemble and deliver welcome bags. I don't assemble invitations. I don't usually do RSVP management. And so sometimes couples will be like, well, why don't you do that? And the answer is I want to work with a certain target market, and I know what my target market can spend on their weddings. And so if I was to do all of those tasks, I would have to charge a price that's going to put me outside of those couples' budgets. So instead, I have figured out how to structure my services so that I'm getting paid what I want to be paid, but that I'm still able to work with the couples that I absolutely love.
Now, kind of a nerdy question, because I know you're a lawyer and you worked, the whole law firm thing. So for folks who don't know, lawyers generally have to like bill every 6 minutes. You have to keep track of what you're doing. Did you get nerdy and like keep track of where you were spending your time and like analyze that to figure out how much time you were spending on an event? Or is that just my daydream?
I haven't. Yeah.
You haven't? Oh, okay.
No, I know. And it's really bad. So like, I know I would chastise myself for this because I know that like you really should at some point track. I, for one, know that my hourly rate is going to be abysmal. Like, I just know, like I said, we are inherently underpaid for what we do. And so, but like, I can't charge a decent hourly rate and still get to do the weddings that I like to do. So it's kind of just like, in a way, this might sound weird or like pessimistic, but in a way, I kind of like price myself to make sure that I can still be enthusiastic about the wedding and not resent the work that I'm doing. Like, I accept that I'm putting in a ton of hours. And if I were to look at my hourly rate, I'd probably be horrified. But I'm getting paid what I want. I'm making enough to live the lifestyle that I want. And I'm working with really amazing people. So for me, that's kind of how I've like structured my business.
Yeah, my cousin used to say that if you could find a job, there's like 3 components. It's like the people, the work, and the pay. And if you can get all 3, you're golden, but nobody ever really gets all 3. Yeah. But if you can get 2 out of the 3, like it's a good job, If you love the people, you love the work, maybe the pay's not so great, like you can, it's still worth keeping that job. But sounds like you have almost all 3.
Yeah, close.
Close. Now, I don't know if you guys have any experience with this, but I think like just kind of from an outsider looking in, right? There's like kind of like these 2 pain points, right? It's like the startup phase, right? This all the stuff we're talking about, like getting the leads, getting customers, pricing. And then there comes a point where like you go through like a growth spurt where you're like, oh my gosh, I need to start bringing people in. And that's when a lot of people come to me as well, right? So they have questions about how to do that and whatnot. Have you guys experienced that, like kind of starting to bring people in, growing your team? Has that been an issue for you guys? Debbie,
do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. When I was doing planning, I mean, that was definitely a huge point of where, you get to this point, you're like, okay, am I going to move forward with my business where I either need to charge a lot more and I'm going to stay as the lead planner and the main planner and people always get me, or I'm going to have to bring on an associate planner to either take over, I'm getting a lot of inquiries for the same date, or, I want to be able to raise my prices, but also be able to serve a client that doesn't quite have that budget, where I can bring in someone else. So yeah, absolutely. It's such a pain point right there as far as deciding which direction you want to go. And then, what do I need to do to get there, right? Like, okay, if I'm going to be the sole planner and charge a lot more, it's like this whole new set of how am I going to adjust my business or services or my niche or whatever to be able to charge what I need to charge, or, bringing on a new planner. Is it going to be an employee? Is it going to be a contractor? Like, what are the legalities with that? And, that's why your contracts and what you do is so, so important to, any business that's at that point. It's like, you really need to get the legal stuff in place and understand the implications of, contractor versus employee and, all the things that you can do with that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Do you think, so when you're navigating that for yourself and, what were some questions you're asking yourself, or what were some questions that were coming up to you? I mean, you mentioned the employee independent contractor, but for example, I get a lot of questions about, planners don't want to bring people on, and as they should, because they're worried that someone's going to come steal all their processes and everything and then go start a competing business, which is I get that, it's your business is very close to you. And so what are some of the maybe worries or concerns that you had when you were first bringing on, associate planners and things like that? And kind of where did you what's your philosophy on that? Or how did you resolve some of those questions and issues?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely a concern. Obviously, I think even for me, though, a bigger concern was, at that point, I had really established my brand and my business to be, just a higher end, really great reputation. Like, how is I going to make this transition of, bringing on other people that are going to represent my business, and are they going to do a good enough job? And, how am I going to find those people that I feel confident with? And then what happens if they leave, down the road, or what happens if they decide to leave at the beginning of wedding season and they have weddings that are booked under my business for dates that I already have booked, right? Mm-hmm. It's like this, what would I do? What would be the game plan if that happened? So those are definitely some of my biggest concerns. And, obviously what if they met, just really made a huge mistake with the wedding or with a client? Mm-hmm. Would it do so much damage to my business that it would ruin the reputation that I had?
Yeah. Yeah. And so what are some what are some solutions maybe you're seeing in conversations in your community and stuff? Are people just going for it, or are they do you hire interns to come in and you train them? I have a friend who she basically brings on interns, paid interns, and then uses that as a way to kind of weed through and figure out who is going to cut it. Right. And then there's her employee. Right. And so she's kind of already trained them and seen how they work, and then helps cultivate their skill sets once they're, on board. Kind of what are some things that you see people are doing to overcome this challenge?
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a great way to do it. For me, what worked really well was, I would, as a planner, once you're in business, you typically get a ton of resumes and inquiries for jobs at your business. So it's impossible to go through all of them, but, I would typically just always try to keep looking through them just if for someone that really stood out to me. Mm-hmm. So I would set up, just a coffee date with them just to get to know them. And, for one of the girls that worked for me, I didn't have any openings at the time for when she inquired, but I was so impressed with the way she applied and in meeting with her that, I kept in touch with her. I let her know I didn't have anything at the time. But when I did a year later, she was the first person I called. I knew I didn't even need to interview anyone else because I knew I wanted her, and then I brought her on just like the other girls that had worked for me. They assisted us with weddings for a full season, or, they would assist me at different weddings. And so I could get a feel for, just their personality and style. Are they a go-getter, or, are they just doing the work I ask them and then they're, going to sit in the other room and play on their phone? Yeah. Are they passionate about it? Are they, how are they with the clients? Just what are their, it's things that you can't ever learn from a resume or even just a coffee meeting. You have to see how they interact on the wedding day. And, are they open to your ideas, or do they have these really strong opinions on how things should be done? And then, if I felt comfortable after them helping for a full season, then it would be time for them to start taking, 1 or 2 weddings, and that's, as far as getting them through, they might sit in on the consultation, even though I'm doing it, the first time or 2 with them. And then, as far as them going through, they might only take wedding day coordination type of clients for the first year. And I might only book them for a few weddings because I want to make sure they're going to stick around so that I'm not in trouble down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it for me too is when when I would meet with someone who was interested in working with me, some of it for me was really just a gut feeling of how I felt about, is their personality going to be a good fit? Is their style going to be a good fit? Did I just jive with them?
Yeah.
Is it going to be easy? Is it easy for me to talk with them? Because if none of those things are happening in my first meeting with them, they're clearly not going to be a good fit for my company.
Yeah.
So, just keeping that in mind and, keeping in mind that if they have the right personality and style and I just like them, right? It's just like a feel good gut feeling. Like I can teach them the planning, I can teach them how to do those things, or they can, be like a sponge when they assist and just absorb, how I'm running things and doing things. So
yeah, I love what you said was like earlier that like you kind of kept these people, like you weren't ready yet, but you almost had like your little Rolodex, if I don't know if people remember what those are anymore, but like your little contact list of people, because I think what ends up happening for a lot of business owners is that like we get to a point where we're so overwhelmed, where we're so desperate to like bring on help that we just hire really quickly and we don't always like hire the right person. But I like that you almost were like, okay, I know I won't need this yet, but I'm going to start kind of creating that little list for myself so that if and when the time comes, I've already done the pre-screening and have already cultivated that relationship.
Right. And I just want to say one thing too about that is the biggest mistake that I see planners make is trying to bring on people into like a full planning, like into taking clients with their business too soon.
Yeah.
It's like, you really have to have the patience in making sure that this person's going to be a good fit and see how it is when they assist. And, I think sometimes we get to this point and we're getting a lot of inquiries that we can't take on and we pass them off and we immediately like, oh my God, I've got to get someone in here right away who can take over these, inquiries, which I totally get that. But you have to think long term of, okay, this is the first time I'm going to add someone, or maybe the second time I'm going to add a planner. Like, I really need to take my time, have a plan for this, make sure I have the right people, make sure they have enough training, like all of that stuff. I mean, for me, it would be sometimes almost a year before I was ready for someone to even start taking their own weddings. And that's with girls who had a really good experience in the industry too. So, yeah, it's really, you have to have that patience of growing. You don't just, run out there and be like, oh, okay, my friend wants to help do weddings with me, so I'm just going to have her take some clients.
Yeah. No, that's lots of good insight there. A lot of good nuggets in there. So Leah, are you like looking to grow? Is this like resonating with you in terms of you've been at it for a while? Are you just like,
I'm actually in the position that Debbie mentioned about where you're kind of decide whether you want to continue going it alone and just raise your prices in order to make a sustainable business. So last year was the first year that I took on 2 weddings in a day for a couple of different reasons. So basically I had to get a separate team of people to cover those weddings for me. And in that process, realized that was just not what I wanted to do for my business. Like I was, obviously stressed and worried about handing off the work that you've done to somebody else to run something for the day of, but I was also just really bummed to not be at those clients' weddings. Like I've worked with people for a year and a half and then to not actually be there to celebrate with them, because that's usually the most rewarding part for me, is like being present and feeling that love and energy. And so it was really kind of a bummer to not be there. So I've identified for my business that I'm really not interested in growing a team of planners. So where I'm at is I'm figuring out what other tasks I need to outsource, because I definitely am at the point where I'm busy enough that I can't do everything myself. So like recently I've hired a few different people to help me blog. I just am starting to work with somebody to do SEO stuff for me. I'm contemplating bringing the girl who was my intern last summer, like having her kind of do like some hourly contract work for me. So that's where I'm at in terms. So like I definitely don't want to grow a team of people and like bring on associate planners, but I am having to figure out how to bring on other people to help in other ways.
Yeah, and I love that you know yourself well enough to know that, like that you've come to that conclusion, right? And that's what I say a lot of times when I talk to folks, like, this is your business. Like, you have an amazing opportunity to, like, you have this blank canvas and you can paint whatever you want to paint. And I think in the beginning, what happens is, because we're not experienced, we're like constantly looking around to see what everybody else is doing. Like, you're looking at other people's like homework, kind of like, what is she doing? What did she write for, and that's great to a certain extent. But then you have to realize, like, this is my business, and like what works for her, may not work for me. And you can structure it pretty much in any way that you want. And so I love to see that, like, to hear that you just realize, like, I rather not have a full team of like these other planners. And because that also requires a certain new like skill sets, like being a manager. And some people don't want to manage, like, not that you can't, it's just, you don't maybe want to be, that's not fun for you. You like being on the floor, like at the wedding, being there, witnessing all of that. So I think that's a really important lesson there for folks to nibble on. So I'm curious, as kind of people who are, entrenched in this world, what are some kind of things that you're seeing on the horizon for the industry? Kind of maybe whether they be trends or just kind of things that you're noticing, like maybe if there's a tide shifting, maybe there isn't, maybe it's business as usual, but any kind of insight or just thoughts on kind of new things that are coming up that maybe other planners should be aware of?
I think it really partly depends on where you are in terms of what trends are. I mean, I was recently reading an article somewhere and they were saying that more couples than ever are hiring wedding planners. So that is definitely encouraging.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I definitely see, and I think there should be more education around this point. But I think couples are definitely like mostly sold on the idea of month of and day of coordination. I think as planners, we need to be clearer in terms of like what that actually means so that we set realistic expectations. But I get couples that are getting married like a year and a half out and they're like, we need a day of we know we need a day of coordinator. Mm-hmm. I don't do month of or day of anymore. And even if I was, I would not book that a year and a half out. But it's been interesting to see that people are like gung ho on like wanting to at least have coordination for their wedding.
Well, that's good. Hopefully some job security there. Yeah. Debbie, how about yourself? Have you kind of seen some kind of, I don't know if the trend is the right word, but just kind of like where the business is going?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what's interesting is a little bit on what Leah said too, is I think just in general, the generation that's getting married now or upcoming, they're used to outsourcing things in their life. So I think just overall, that's super helpful for wedding planners because, it comes to them doing a wedding. Obviously, most of them have never done this before. And, it's not unusual for them to, okay, who can I hire to help me with this? Right. Because they've been doing this with other things in their life, whether it's, even things like using Lyft to outsource their, their rides for the day or, a cleaning company or, whatever else that they're doing. So I think in general, that's just really good for the planning community as far as businesses go.
I was just going to say that I feel like the new generation values like convenience and experience so much more than the us older generations. Yeah, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. And then of course, social media, right? I mean, how hugely that has affected all of our lives, but in the industry, I see planners tell me all the time, like, oh, I have clients now finding me on Instagram or they're finding me on Pinterest or, just really a different shift there. I mean, I think SEO is still huge as far as, you just get on Google and like, okay, I live in Texas and I'm having a wedding in Dallas. And I'm just going to get on Google and say, okay, Dallas wedding planners and, kind of call some of the ones on the first page and see what their information is. And so, yeah, just really interesting. I mean, when I started planning, it was 2005, so we didn't have any, right?
Did we even have Facebook back then? I'm just kidding.
I don't think so. I know that there was.
No, I don't.
It's not.
It did. So It did
Right.
exactly not to the public in 2005. It you still had to have a
edu,
college
the
email address to
.edu,
sign up.
yeah. Yeah. Isn't that crazy, you
So
guys?
crazy.
And it was only, what, 13 years ago? And how much has
So old.
changed? Oh my God. Don't even. I know, we were just talking about like old cell phones the other day, like the back in the day, like, you know, the Nokia where you could like change the face. I don't even know if you guys remember, but it was like everybody's like first cell phone. And back when phones were actually phones and not computers, you know.
Yeah.
And all
I
the,
was reminiscing about my hot pink Razor phone. You remember that?
Yeah.
The, like, really skinny flip phone. Yeah, I was reminding about that the other day.
And then when you had to text and you had to punch the number, like each number, like, you know, 2-3 times to get the letter. There were no emojis, you guys. That's funny. Oh gosh, those were the days. Sometimes I miss those days. But with that said, I wanted to wrap it up and I wanted to ask you guys, Leah, you could start up. If you were looking back and talking about our younger selves and back in the good old days, you know, what would you tell your younger self? Like looking back, you know, just about business, about life, any kind of advice you would give younger Leah?
Yeah, the biggest thing that stands out to me is I kind of wish I had figured out the comparison game a lot sooner. So obviously, like starting out, you're looking at what everybody else in your area is doing. You're, you know, comparing yourself. You're looking at how busy they are at the venues that they're working at, who they're getting to work with. And sometimes like that's going to make you feel bad and doubt what you're doing. And, you know, over the years, and it definitely took me some time to realize this myself, but like I realized and really do truly believe that your people will find you and that all of us planners are very different from our personalities to our work style, to our experience, to our brands, everything. And so we're going to attract the people that are meant to be with us. And there's plenty of other planners who I feel like are my colleagues. And if somebody loves them, then honestly, they're probably not going to love me. You know, like we're just so different. And I had a moment where I was waiting for an appointment to start at like a rental company, and there was another planner there with one of her couples, and I kind of watched how she spoke with and interacted with her couples, and I was just like, wow, that really does solidify it, because I would never, that's just, her style was so not my style. Like, not that it was bad the way she was interacting with her clients, but it was just very personal to her and very different from me. So trying to tell my younger self to stop paying attention to what everybody else is doing, to have confidence in what I'm doing, to focus on myself, and that you'll thrive if you can just kind of like push everyone aside. And the other thing too is not to be afraid or feel bad if you have to unfollow certain people on Instagram.
Oh,
like
girl.
if there's other planners or even other like anybody, if anybody makes you feel bad about yourself and what you're doing, just unfollow.
Right.
Like they could be wonderful people, but you got to do what you need to do for you.
Yeah. And I think there's just like, everybody has those like trigger people or those trigger, you know, profiles and stuff. And I believe in that too. And I think it's just, you got to keep yourself in like a happy state of mind. And the reality is like, it doesn't matter, you know, none of like it, you make it a big deal in your head, but reality is like, it's only a big deal to you. So do you just like, just like, how do you, I mean, it sounds great to be like, oh, don't compare yourself to others, but like other than like unfollowing people, like how do you actually practice that?
You just have to really, I mean, like for me, it was really believing that I bring something different to the table than other people do, and that I'm attracting my people and I'm attracting wonderful clients and I'm doing well in my business. And so I've got to be confident in that and stop worrying about it. The other thing you have to realize is that what is shown on social, and this gets said so many times, but what's shown on social media is not the full picture. Like, you know, if somebody seems super busy, maybe they're really undercutting their pricing and they're just not at a sustainable, like you can't do, like you were talking about, if you want to make $100,000 and you're charging $2,000 for a planning package, like you've got to do 50 and you're going to burn out real fast if you're trying to do 50 a year.
Yeah.
So like, you never know what people are charging. If they seem busy, you never know, you know, what people's financial situation is, whether they are fully supporting themselves, whether they're still even working part-time or full-time jobs. Like that's not always evident. There have been people who like I follow on Instagram and I find out that their wedding business is just a side hustle and I'm shocked. And then there's other people who, you know, have a partner who is able to help support them. So their income isn't, they're not having to support themselves from their business. You just never know what people's stories are. You can't judge. You just really can't. You have to remember you can't judge yourself against what you don't know is the full picture.
Yeah, I always say like everybody starts from like a different like starting line, you know, and it's not to say that one is better than the other, but like when you're like quote unquote running a race, if you even want to compare life to that, I don't know if that's a great analogy, but like not everybody starts at the same starting line. So you can't say, oh, this guy's like further ahead. Well, he might have like started, you know, 100 yards ahead of you because of whatever, maybe connections, or they had certain experiences that like kind of propelled that person forward. So that's a beautiful reminder. So thank you for that. And one that I will write down and remind myself too.
Yeah.
So Debbie, what would you tell your younger self?
Well, first I just want to say I would absolutely echo every single thing that Leah just said. Literally, like I could have said word for word. That's exactly how I feel too. And also what I share with so many of my planners who are coaching clients and just in general on Planners Lounge, like, yeah, literally exactly everything you said. So true. So much truth in that. And I think the other, you know, when I think about, aside from telling myself those things, if I could go back, would be defining success for myself. You know, when someone says, oh, I want to have a successful planning business, like, I mean, what does that mean? It's something different for everyone. Is it a certain amount of financial success? Is it the ability to quit your day job? Is it just the freedom of working for yourself and what that gives you? Is it, you know, running a, you know, business where, you know, you are the CEO and you have 10 planners working for you, you know, or is it more, you really want this like really boutique business where you charge a pretty significant fee and you only work with 5 clients a year? You know, there's so many things that go into what does success mean. So I think if I could go back and have been able to define that earlier, I think that would have just helped guide my business a little bit better. You know, when I look at what success means to me now, which revolves a lot around the freedom, you know, the freedom of being an entrepreneur, the freedom of having your own business. And that, you know, those, you know, I have like my mission statement is actually my definition of success for me personally. And it really guides all the decisions I make in my business. Like, does this, you know, if I think about doing something for Planners Lounge, I look back and say, does this fit my definition of success moving forward? And if it doesn't, it's like, okay, that's like, I know it's an easy decision to make right there because it doesn't quite fit with what success means to me. So,
and letting go of like, I think it's also redefining it as you evolve. Like when I was younger, success meant something for me, you know, and now it means something pretty different. And I would never have thought that like when I was younger, like looking forward at, you know, this stage of my life, I would have defined it so differently. But like being okay with like redefining that and checking in and be like, is that working for me anymore? Is that like driving me? So you guys, this has been so I just thank you so much for being so honest and being so candid and sharing your insight with the listeners. I know people are going to take away a lot of value from it. If they want to find you and continue the conversation, Leah, where can folks find you? Where can they get in touch?
Yes. So my website is colorpopevents.com. On social media, I am at colorpopevents on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest, though I don't use my Twitter, so don't
I don't either. I never figured it out. I was like,
yeah. And if anybody does want to chat more, have any specific questions, they can always email me at leah@colorpopevents.com.
Perfect. And then Debbie?
My website is plannerslounge.com. And also on Facebook and Instagram, just Planners Lounge is the website, and same with Twitter. And then email is just info@plannerslounge.com.
Perfect. And we'll make sure to link up all of that stuff in the show notes so you don't have to write that down if you're like at the gym. And if you're at the gym, I'm totally jealous. I'm not comparing myself, but I should totally be working out today. Anyway, you guys, thank you so much again for taking the time to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That wraps it up for another episode, my friend. You can always learn more about Leah and Debbie, and you guessed it, head into the show notes over at AnnetteStepanian.com/podcast/77. So with that said, we are going to bid adieu, and I am wishing you a fan-freaking-tastic day, week, month. I just hope you are smiling and butterflies are coming out of your ears because you're so inspired and you're doing so great. Because you are doing so great. Don't forget that. Okay, you guys, I will see you back here next week. Before you skip to that next episode, I want to invite you to a special event called Legal 360 Live. In this live online summit, we're going to walk through what you need to know, legally speaking, as you start and grow your business. So if you're ready to roll up your polka dotted sleeves and finally get your legal house in order once and for all, head on over to yourlegalbff.com/live. That's yourlegalbff.com/live.